When Ukrainian troops pushed Russian occupiers out of the occupied city of Kherson this November, there were scenes of celebration. But in recent weeks, it has become the target of intensifying Russian attacks. Ukraine's military says Russia fired 33 rockets at civilian targets in the 24 hours going into Wednesday. Hundreds of civilians are fleeing as Russian forces pound populated areas with mortars and artillery.
Kherson is a city slowly being reduced to rubble. Kyiv says Moscow is deploying more tanks and armoured vehicles to the area and further stepping up its aerial bombardment of the city. People here have already seen more than their fair share of this brutal war. But in recent days and nights, things have become even worse. This woman says she lost her son in an overnight raid.
I must have felt something would go wrong in the morning because I urged him to wake up and leave the house, but he didn't, and that was it. Our lives are ruined.
Russia's relentless shelling is destroying Kherson's critical infrastructure and taking a massive toll on civilian life. A mortar attack on Christmas Eve killed 11 people and injured dozens more. Among the dead, a social worker, a butcher, and a woman selling mobile SIM cards. Everyday civilians at the city's central market. Some who have held out here now say they can't take it any longer. They're getting out while they still can.
We stayed this whole time and thought it would pass, but when the home next to ours and my father's home were hit, it was too scary.
Just last month, there were celebratory scenes in Kherson as Kyiv retook the regional centre. Now it appears Moscow is trying to retake it. Either that or simply raze it to the ground.
And for more on this story, I'm very pleased to welcome Marina Myron, a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of War Studies at King's College London. Thank you so much for taking the time. I want to begin by asking you why Kherson is such a focus for the Russian military right now.
Obviously, Kherson was a slap into Putin's face when the Russian troops left Kherson and had to switch to defensive positions along the Dnieper River. So obviously what Russia is trying to do right now is, on the one hand, they want to show that the Ukrainian forces cannot hold it and cannot protect the citizens living there. So they are basically trying to terrorize the population so that the people lose credibility in the power of the Ukrainian armed forces on the one hand. On the other hand, it shouldn't be interpreted as Russia's attempt to retake Kherson. That would be strategically unwise because they have quite solid defensive position along the river. And they just don't have the manpower right now. But what they're trying to do is to pin down Ukrainian forces in Kherson because the real fighting is going on somewhere else around Bakhmut and around Svatove and Kremenna, and that's basically the major focus for the Russians.
And can you tell us more about that heavy fighting that is continuing elsewhere in eastern Ukraine?
Yes, absolutely. So there is a very important road connecting Svatove and Kremenna, and the Ukrainian forces have been trying to make advances in that region after they have retaken Liman. However, they have not been successful yet, and the Russians are trying to defend their positions because the reason for that is a key region to go back to Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, which Russians have taken. So that is a key part, maybe in and of itself. Those two cities are not significant, but they basically provide the Ukrainian forces with a possibility to move and retake more territory. And another place is obviously Bakhmut, where the PMC Wagner is trying to take the city. So that's another kind of symbolic city for Russia, because when Russia withdrew its troops from Izum, the only grouping that remained in that direction was a Wagner grouping in Bakhmut, with the idea of taking Bakhmut to be able to advance towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. So that has another kind of not just strategic, but also a political meaning.
And what about the potential for diplomacy? How likely do you think a negotiated peace is at this stage, given that the Kremlin has now rejected a peace plan proposed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky?
I think right now it's quite difficult because we have seen the resolve of President Zelensky. He is not going to agree to Russia's terms, and Russia is keeping its terms. It's being pretty firm and saying basically we are not going to withdraw our forces. We're going to play the long game. And so to reach an agreement right now, the end states that both states envisage are so fundamentally different that there can be no agreement. The best scenario we can possibly hope for in order to stop the whole violence is to freeze the conflict. And that would mean intervention from Turkey, intervention from other NATO members and from the United States to freeze the conflict and to reach some kind of a ceasefire. However, a peace agreement is not likely to happen anytime soon.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us. That is Dr. Marina Myron, postdoctoral researcher at the Department of War Studies, King's College London.